Hey, we're live. Hey, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode, I think, 207. We're going to call this Authentication Methods, which I don't know if it's apt or not, but we found a really awesome article about how artists authenticate some work, and we wanted to go through different authentication means, mainly because, hey, look, it's hard to find news stories that appeal to a wide audience unless you want the next remote code exploit for hypervisor. I don't think you're going to care. So we have to find articles that are big enough to talk about, and we have all the information, everything else. That's why it's been delayed. Facebook's having a tough time, but we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and then the other one, and the other one, the other one, and the other one. We're going from there. We have a YubiKey set up, but we got to talk to them. So we're just trying to find things that we feel like are actually very helpful. So again, I'm Haim Cohen. Tom is somewhere. Tom's there.
I'm here. I'm okay in this seat around this area right here.
Yeah. So I sent Tom this article. Do we all know the artist Banksy? I'm sure everyone does. If you've
Banksy?
I see his work. I say, wow, that's kind of cool. And then it's like millions of dollars, and I'm thinking like, okay, whatever you want. I'm not an art person, but I find it funny that he sets up. We assume it's a guy. He sets up shop in an art gallery, and he puts the artwork goes on sale, and it goes through a shredder, and actually fetches more work because it didn't actually work to shred the art. Remember that from last year?
Indeed, that was kind of cool. It was interesting. It was a cool statement.
So I mean, okay, social justice, all that other stuff, but again, even social justice people need to make money, and people want to know how to authenticate to make sure it's there. So he actually came up with this really cool authentication scheme. And you have to remember, he is anonymous, so nobody knows who he is. He set up a fake company, a pestcontrol.org or something like that. And he gives out a certificate of authenticity. But if you want to transfer it, so we know that it's real, he created this public-private key method. And Tom, did you see that? I sent that to you.
I actually did not see it.
Okay. So I'm going to resend it to you. But basically, he gives you some fake, he gives you a document. It's your name, address, printing, all this other stuff. He has a ripped up 10-pound note of Princess Diana with some number scribbled on it. So you look at this fairly like ordinary piece of paper, there's some number on it, and then everyone says, well, you can authenticate, like you can just copy this, like I can print this out and literally copy it. And basically you can. The problem is it's not going to take you anywhere. So this is a really interesting use of a private public key. So we talked about that. You can put your public key on literally anything, but you need that other half to get it. How do you get that other half? You can reverse engineer it, which is, at this point, depending on how strong it is, almost impossible. You can guess and hope that you're right, but most of the time you can't. So what happens is he takes this this $10 fake note, writes a number on it. You write to the company, you give all the information you have. They take that number and they call the person who they have on file. And that person has to say, hey, yes, I have this, read me off this other number, or read me the number, whatever it is. So they're calling somebody else to hopefully verify that. And they have to say yes, and it has to match the artist's records of who has it. And if all that checks out and the art checks out and everything else, they'll issue a transfer of ownership and another certificate of authenticity, and you can move on. So I just thought this was really cool. It's a very simple way to authenticate, and I thought it was genius.
Yeah, this is a pretty cool key pair system. I wish I owned a piece of Banksy artwork. I mean, like a lot of people, but I am not an art collector. I wish I owned it just to be able to see how this thing works in practice, because it looks like a really simple, elegant solution.
It's And if you read, I put the article already in the show notes, but if you find it, they go, yeah, you could make this piece of paper. You can do this. You can do that. You can do all this other stuff. You can try to forge it. But at the end of the day, that other half of that that $10 fake note that they have matches up with some sort of private key that they have on their file. Now, my question is, I mean, this is not, dare I say, blockchain. This is a central database. They have a database there. This is not distributed. So I don't know how even the number matters. I guess you can't fake the owner. So like I can't say, hey, Tom owns this with your phone number, and then they call you. It has to match some record. I still don't know specifically how the number plays into it. It must be not a hash, but it must represent something.
Yeah, there's a couple ways you could do it. You could hash the information out. You could include a serial number in your hash generation. It could just be a signing key of some sort with authenticated data. There's a lot of ways that you could do this kind of authentication with a hashed or cryptographically signed system.
So I saw this and I said, okay, how else do we authenticate things? And the first thing that came back to me was time in history when I think I was playing Command and Conquer, and you would put the game in and it would say, okay, go to this page in your book and tell us what the third word is. That's the only time I remember it. And then I asked Tom, and Tom's like, oh yeah, there's so many more different things like that. I just don't remember any of them.
Yeah, so old computer games, especially floppy-based computer games, had a huge, massive issue with piracy back in the day. And just for everyone watching and listening, I'd like to apologize. It is tree pollen season here in Washington State, and it is killing me. So yeah, my voice is going to be a little weird this episode, so just putting it out there. I hit it with some Zyrtec, so we'll see if this works. But old computer games, because they're on floppy disks are ubiquitous, super easy to read and write to, massive, massive piracy problems. Game companies and software companies experimented with basically pretty primitive, but somewhat slightly effective measures of DRM and copy protection. Sometimes it would be right up front. The game would say, hey, give me the third word on this page and we'll let you into the game. Other times it would take place, right before or during a boss battle or a key moment, so that people wouldn't know that the copy protection would kick in until they've already played the game. So if you're like halfway through it and you realize, oh no, my pirated copy didn't come with a manual, you're stuck there, right? You've either got to go find a manual somewhere, which they usually weren't shared online. They usually weren't included with pirated software unless the pirate actually went through the effort of playing through the game and then realized, well, now I've got to go to a Xerox machine and, include this massive booklet with my pirated discs. It usually wasn't included. So that worked a little bit. Other companies include like actual, basically passcode cards, where they would say, hey, go to, row F, column G, and give me this 4-digit code. And it was just randomized codes on a piece of paper. And then every so often they would rotate that and give you a new card and a new version of the game if there was any patching. And that seemed to work out, a little less well than the manual, because super easy to just, post the code somewhere or, include a little piece of paper in with the pirated floppy disk. So that was pretty cool.
I just feel like, I don't think they I guess they had to have the manual already printed. They needed to have the entire manual. Otherwise, if they ask you the same 10 questions, you can probably figure that out.
Exactly.
And why couldn't they just break the thing on the floppy disk?
So they could, and that would allow them to copy it, but it wouldn't get you past the authentication, right? You could copy that floppy all day long, but it still wouldn't get you past the questions without the manual or a guide to get past the questions. There's actually an an interesting form of parental controls in some more adult-oriented adventure games back in the day, where they would ask questions like, "Hey, who's the current Secretary of State in the year 1980, whatever?" And theoretically, only adults would know who the Secretary of State was, right? Kids don't know. They don't care. They don't pay attention to politics, or so the thought was. So it would effectively lock children out of the game due to relatively sane adult trivia questions.
I just see it as I would be the one to. I don't lose. I never lost the manual, but I feel like I would be the one to lose the manual, and you would have to call them back up, I guess, and say, "Hey, I lost the manual." I wonder if there was another way on top of that.
I've absolutely done that. So another way, and this was more common in the CD-ROM era. It's where it started to really come into popularity. Is that there would be stickers with CD keys on the jewel cases of whatever disc you were buying. So my copy of Half-Life came with a key for Half-Life, and during the installer, it would ask for one of the keys, and it would authenticate your install to to basically throw the software on your system. Now, this wasn't perfect. It was pretty easily cracked. It was pretty easily bypassed. But it did do, a small bit to deter piracy. It certainly didn't help people sharing CD keys online, and you could still find plenty of CD key drops online on Pastebin or wherever to get past some of these old game installers.
I mean, I think everyone in the mid '90s pirated Photoshop.
Oh yeah,
using
absolutely.
the key generation. And well, I mean, I guess I wasn't old enough to understand what was going on. I mean, I understood, okay, I had to type this in to continue, but I didn't understand why I was doing it. Who would steal this? Because again, computers were still hard to get. They were still fairly expensive. And remember, a floppy disk was 1.4 megabytes. So it was it's all right, what's going on here? And then all of a sudden BitTorrent came about, and peer-to-peer, and all the key gens. You went to the underground, and it's like, do this. And I love the people who pirated WinZip. That was always good. You didn't want to have to click the like button, so they cracked the key generation, and you went from there. But yeah, then I do remember the jewel cases, and I still have a bunch there. I'm looking through some of the CDs I have here to see if any of them have them. But then the problem is that, again, those are fixed numbers. They went from some serial key, and we go from there. Then we have to, so now that you can crack that, you had to move on. And that's when DRM came in. So then they would put, and then we had the problem where, so DVDs came about, and what they did is they put a code in there, and then the consortium, which the Blu-ray consortium at that later on will start charging for it. So on the CD, on the movies, they would put that in, and you had to break it to get it. And just like everything else that was there, they broke it. We had movies now. And then Blu-ray came about, and they did something else. I don't think it was a more advanced, but they had this huge hex code. The problem is that if you're watching the movie, the code has to be there, all the licensing and everything else. So they figured out a way to reverse engineering, and they had that. So I don't know what the answer is to all of this, but
yeah, when we're talking about a DRM and protecting content and stopping piracy and that sort of stuff, there always exists what we call the analog hole, and this is quite literally the weakest link in any and all DRM schemes. So right now, when you watch something on Netflix, that content is coming to you encrypted. Your browser is loaded with a proprietary software product. Most likely, your browser is loaded with a proprietary software product if you can watch Netflix that actually receives these keys in a secure fashion that allows you to watch stuff. But if you wanted to look around for pirated Netflix shows, those are all over the place. Well, how'd they get them? If you can see or hear or interact with, a piece of software, you as a human don't contain any sort of DRM decryptors, right? You can just watch The Office, right? Your brain doesn't have to go through a mathematical calculation to figure out if you're allowed to watch The Office. So if your computer can display the content or give you the content in a way that you as a human can consume, that means other applications can too. I remember one of the earlier just awful forms of piracy that even still happen today with cam rips of movies that are still in theaters is somebody literally points a video camera at a screen and records the thing that they're watching. And there aren't very many systems in place to stop that. There are a few. Certain camera manufacturers will look for basically blips that only a computer can see, or only a super high frame camera will be able to detect, and it will just shut down a recording or act like it's recording and not write anything to disk. Now, that doesn't stop everything, right? What if your camera manufacturer doesn't implement that safeguard technology? Well, then, you can get around it. So the analog hole is always a way to take DRM content and get a completely DRM-free copy out of it.
So, no, you said that perfectly, because that was a big problem, and then we moved on to other things. I think, how does it work with money? So you can't photocopy money because the copier sees something like that. Because that was the next big thing. It's can we copy something and use the analog loophole that way? And I think copiers and printers figured out that you can't do money. So, and then
I am looking for it's a constellation. I wish yes, Urian constellation, also known as Omron rings or donuts. So I'm going to read directly from the Wikipedia page. It's a pattern of symbols incorporated into banknote designs worldwide since about 1996. It is added to help imaging software detect the presence of a banknote in a digital image. Such software can then block the user from reproducing banknotes to prevent counterfeiting using color photocopiers. Basically, it's just a little shape. It's made up of 5 rings. There's some mathematical distances between the rings. And if software detects this, like if you throw a $100 bill onto a scanner, it will detect the constellation of these rings and say, okay, they're about this far apart. They look like this. Oh, man, that's a $100 bill. I am not going to copy this, and it will just refuse to do it. Now, it's not perfect, right? If you were to hack the firmware or build your own copier or use other software that doesn't implement this safeguard, you can get around it. And that's how modern, the counterfeiters will get around it. They will use hacked up software. But this does a decent job of preventing the script kiddies or the people literally putting dollar bills inside of Xerox machines. There are plenty of other safeguards that prevent those from being used, but this is one of the easier ones.
So then we move on. So you got through movies and you got through everything else. And again, the idea is, how do you prove something is real? And the next step is, now we wanted to get into identity. How do you prove who you are? So online, obviously username and password, but we found out that obviously you can give that to somebody else. So then we did all these other things like fingerprints and biometric and everything else. And we go back to the problem of, okay, it still doesn't prove who you are. It just proves that you have all these 2, 3, 4 different things.
Yeah, so there's a few ways that you can try to identify yourself. And we've talked about these before. The most common is something you know, which would be a password or a passphrase or an answer to a security question or personal information or knowledge-based security questions, which a lot of places will use to validate credit. Have you ever lived at this address? Have you ever lived in this state? Have you ever worked for this company? And they'll ask you a series of these to try to prove who you are. It's not great because that information's all publicly available. But it's better than just letting anyone into an account. So that's, stuff There's also stuff you have, which could be anything from, a a YubiKey, a U2F security key. It could be an RSA secure ID token. It could be a random number generator hardware thing that you've got. It could be your phone with Google Authenticator that shows random numbers that you type in somewhere. It's basically, it's saying that it's usually not used alone, but it's basically saying that if a person owns this device that can give these answers, we're going to trust more that this person is who they say they are. There's also another way, something that has been used and has been getting better but isn't foolproof, is something you are. So this could be anything from handprints, fingerprints, Face ID. It could be retina mapping patterns. There's a lot of things that you can use to prove that you are you. The issue with these biometric authenticators is, what if they change? What if you're in a terrible accident and you get your fingerprints just melted off? Well, now you can't authenticate with fingerprints. Your DNA doesn't change, but you do leave it quite literally everywhere. You throw away, your Starbucks mug of coffee or whatever into a trash can. Well, you've now left DNA in the trash can where anyone can get it. You walk by, you're probably going to shed, a couple hair follicles or skin cells, and now your DNA is there too. So it's not great, but it's okay as an aside. It's okay to say, well, we're going to take something and combine it with something that you are, and that'll give us a decent picture of you being you, or something and something you have. So like a password and a Google Authenticator code. Or you can go crazy and you can demand all three. I've only used one system that demanded biometrics, something I had and something I knew to log in. And honestly, the system wasn't even guarding something that important. Like, I wasn't logging into Fort Knox.
I mean, I'm going to throw you a loaded question. So is this where we come up? So with all these things, let's say you had all three, there's still some deniability.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
You have a gun to your head. They can chop off your hand. They can do any of that. Like the spy movies have that.
Yeah, So somebody can, grab your Starbucks mug for your DNA authentication, or just grab like your glass of delicious tea. They could just lift a fingerprint right off of here and then use that to authenticate the what you are. They could, take you to a secret government facility and torture you to get what you know. And they could steal your phone out of your pocket to get what you have. So yeah, it doesn't prove 100% that you did the thing. Now, the only thing you have to worry about in the court of law is proving beyond a reasonable doubt. And if somebody said, yes, my wallet got stolen, I was taken to a secret government facility, and they lifted my fingerprints off a glass, you're probably not going to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that it wasn't you logging into that system.
I mean, so then we wanted to go to public-private keys, because the good thing about public-private keys, or I'm going to butcher this now, but private-public keys, you don't know any of that. I mean, you know where it is, so it's more of what you have. You have your public key. So that's the first barrier to authenticate against you. You know where this file is, assuming you don't let it get out, because if it got out, it's a different problem. So with all that, you don't actually know the key. You're just using some file to authenticate you, and that should be sufficiently strong at that point.
Yes and no. So it's still, if you're only using a public key to authenticate you, you can think of it as basically only using Google Authenticator to authenticate yourself. Is it better than a password? I don't know. It depends on the strength of your password. Is it foolproof? No, absolutely not. Somebody could steal the file. They could break into your computer. There could be active malware, watching network traffic, or sniffing your hard drive, more likely, watching your keystrokes. Somebody could steal your YubiKey. It's a good system, but the thing that key pairs have over other forms of authentication is that you can put out a public half and say that this is me, and you can make signed statements, cryptographically signed statements with that key. This is most often used in software deployments, where Microsoft will actually sign Windows updates. When they push Windows updates, it's not just random binaries they throw across the wire. It used to be. But now with software signing, they have a private key, they have a public certificate, and you can validate in that chain. When they hand you a Windows update, you can cryptographically say, yes, I'm sure that whoever sent me this package, this Windows update, actually signed this with the private key that is theoretically owned by Microsoft, right? You can't prove that somebody didn't break into Microsoft's, headquarters and steal their private keys, but beyond a reasonable doubt, you can say that this was signed with the proper key and feel good about installing it. Now, this has been abused in the past. Companies have gotten their private keys for software signing stolen. Famously, the Stuxnet virus, the cyber weapon created by the U.S. Intelligence agencies, was signed using a stolen software signing key. They went in, stole a company's key, and were actually signing malware with that company's key. It looked perfectly legitimate, but it wasn't. So it's not foolproof.
We've had that recently in the supply chain where they've gotten, was it last week? Asus was targeting the MAC addresses of the 600 laptops, where they were targeting the MAC addresses using Asus's private key. So you're right, that's not there. But again, it's one of those, you have to find a way, and it's a level of trust that you have to say, well, if they did all of this, are they who they say they are? We understand that there's a little bit of doubt, but how far do you really want to go? And the further you go, the more expensive and everything else it costs. So it's one of those, you do have to draw a line somewhere.
And keep in mind that hacking authentication systems, you're going through like the gates of the castle. Like, you are attacking the point that is theoretically the most looked at, the most hardened, and the most secured. There are probably easier ways into a system, right? You don't want to attack the system at its strongest point where the most people are looking. If you can upload what looks to be an image to a server, but it's actually a PHP script, and get it to execute when you go to that URL and grab you the information you want to exfiltrate out of that system, that's probably way easier. There are probably way easier ways to break into a system than attacking authentication methods directly. So can you break auth systems? Can you impersonate people? Yes. Are there easier ways to exfiltrate data or break into a system? Most likely.
I just remember the XKCD comic. We're going to use quantum computers to brute force somebody's Wi-Fi password. And the other guy just whacks the person over the head and said, "Give me your password," and he does. I mean, that's at the end of the day the easiest way.
Yep.
We do all of that.
I've seen plenty of I mean, this is basically how phishing attacks work, right? The bad people just ask people for their passwords, and if they're able to pull the wool over their eyes and trick these people, right? Let's not victim blame here. If they're able to con people into giving out their passwords, they've already won. They don't need to do all this weird crypto mumbo jumbo, breaking encryption, building a quantum computer to destroy private keys. They don't need to do any of that. They just need to convince people to give them what they need.
I just thought about this. How do we get, what was it, where you need 4 people and 3 of them still have to be living to get access to, let's say, the Coke secret recipe? That's not authentication, but
yeah, so it could be, right? So you could use, I want to say, it's Shamir's secret sharing algorithm.
I was going to say it's built into LastPass, but you're right.
Shamir's secret sharing scheme. If you just look up Shamir's secret sharing, there's a fantastic article on Wikipedia. Basically, it's mathematically proven that you could take a chunk of text or a secret, or you could take something and break it into enough pieces and say, okay, I'm going to break this password into 20 pieces, but we need 15 to recreate it. And it will break it mathematically in such a way that unless you have the minimum number of pieces, it cannot recreate. And what's lucky is that, let's say, 3 of those pieces are scattered to the wind. So now you have a total of 17 pieces to work with. You still have more than the minimum. It doesn't matter which pieces you have, as long as you have the minimum required pieces necessary to recreate that secret. So you could use something like that to, kind of get a collective group to agree on a decision. It's kind of like the turning the 2 keys in the nuke bunker that we've all seen in action movies. You need to have so many people agree to execute an action for the secret to be unlocked, and that's a really cool scheme. It's actually a lot of fun to play with.
So, okay, we are running out of time, so we're exactly at time now. Again, we have a WhatsApp group. You want more stories, more deep down stories, you can come in there. Other than that, the good news is that there's not that much news, like big things that are doom and gloom. They're little things, but there's not that
It's all
big story. So
it's all very much in flux right now.
So I mean, we're ready to go. We hear something, but we're just trying. We're just trying to find other things on these off weeks for us to talk about. So, look, authentication is hard. And how do you authenticate little kids? How do you authenticate people with disabilities? How do you authenticate? You find these things. People are willing to listen, and hopefully, you can make money from selling these authentication schemes. But just remember, people have to break you're putting it out there, and you're trying to make sure it's secure and not just people can just find a way to hack you later and destroy your business model. So anyway, we'll leave you with that. We will see you hopefully or not hopefully a story next week, but hopefully we'll see you next week. So
we'll find
bye,
something.
Everyone. Okay.
See you.
Bye. Stop.